But we get him today. It's Drew Hall, everybody.
I like that because he's so busy. It's true. It's true. But you know what, though? As a musician, definitely cannot complain about being busy. Just before you say something you can't take away, take a breath and let it out. Try to think about what would love do now. Wondering if you should cross that line for good. Whatever you decide, ask yourself from inside, what will love do now? Everything is either an act of love or a cry for love. That's why for love we try for love. In the end, that's all we know, that's real. Whether right or wrong, doesn't matter just as long as you let your heart decide. Ask yourself from inside, what will love do now? Everything is either an act of love or a cry for love. That's why for love we try for love. In the end, that's all we know, that's real. Whether right or wrong, doesn't matter just as long as you let your heart decide. Ask yourself from inside, what will love do now? What will love do now? What will love do now? Thank you.
So my talk today was basically a talk. Or not. Reading from the heart requires that we ask what love will do now. If we ask nothing else, if we get no clear answer, all we have to do is wait until our heart leads us. That is what leading from the heart is. And what I find is that one of my favorite games is to watch what the next generation are up to. So when I say, those kids today, what I generally mean is, dang, that's impressive. I've been known to do a talk in which is called Kids Today, and I talk about what kids are up to in this world. And instead of picking on them, because remember, my generation came up with parachute pants, I can say nothing. What I do is I watch what they're doing, and I am so impressed. I am so impressed. Those of you who are on Facebook probably saw our new minister this past, Now he gets to shinny. Famous Seamus, who is one of our youth, he is part of the Children's Association for Awesomeness, is doing this thing called Kid Minister. I can't wait until we have all that stuff up on our website. I have to tell you, he's put out 2 one-minute videos so far. The first, and thank you very much, Erin, for sharing your lovely and charming solo kid with us. Kid Minister, in the first 4 days of the first video, was seen 807 times. But wait, there's more. The second video came out, and on the first day, he got 640 watches. I don't know if that counts how many times it got shared onto other people's stuff. I know that I have one person who friended me who lives in India, and he shared it. So Famous Seamus, I know, is gunning for my pulpit, and I'm okay with that. I will hang on till he's ready. You guys just might need to turn my hearing aids way up for me to know what the heck I'm talking about. So that's what youth is up to. And to give you a little, if you don't know what any of that stuff means, I have my most popular talk from June of 2018 has 70 watches. 70. Kids today. I adore them because the thing is, kids today are not like my generation and older. We're kind of bogged down in our belief system, aren't we? We have tried things and we have made our mistakes and we found what works for us. And some of us are so far into that rut in thinking, we can't see over the top of it. It's like a snowdrift in New Hampshire in February. You actually cannot see the top. I've been in some of my ruts so long, I've decorated and redecorated. And that's just how, life is. We figure out what works for us. We put a lot of time into figuring out what works for us. And then the next generation comes along and does something completely different. They've done studies now, and who they are, I can't remember which university this was, but the reason we all hate the kids' music is because our brains are tuned to a certain frequency. It generally happens, I think, in about high school. And so when you go into Fry's and you hear your 8th grade dance music being done as Muzak in the grocery store, it's okay to be a little offended and a little bit like, ooh, I remember that. Scott, I remember him. Poor Scott. I dumped him for his brother. I was in 8th grade. I didn't know boys spoke English at that point, which has nothing to do with this talk. So, when we hear the music of the next couple generations, there's a reason it just sounds like noise. It's because our brains, the way we think, the actual frequency that our brain works at gets set at a certain point. But we can change it. Hobbes said, we deliberately trade in the old ideas of lack and limitation, of fear and pain, and in their stead create new ideas, create the new ideas of abundance and peace, of joy and friendship and opportunity. That is what we do. We trade in the old ideas, just like the old clunker you drove in college. Please tell me you're not still driving that.
I found myself without brakes on the 8 on a highway before I was willing to trade in that particular car. And I was happy it made it into the dealership. Prayer works, folks. So like I said, one of my favorite games is to find out what the kids are doing. And it's one of the reasons I focused in my early days on working with the teens and the young adults. One of the young adults I felt like I got to know, and it was a blessing in my life, is Katie Dutcher. Now, she goes by Stellar now, so I'll try to remember to call you Stellar, Katie. And Stellar lives in Texas, is an activist and a musician, as well as somebody who is living these principles. Somebody who absolutely knows who she is and how to create. And November 14th, 2016, she posted about an experience she had where she saw a car pulled over by the cops on the side of the road, an African-American family. He was being arrested. And so she did what took some courage, which was pull over behind and choose to stand witness. Choose to stand witness in spite of the fact that I'm sure that the cops were not excited about that. Choose to stand witness even though I know her to be something of an introvert and something of someone who has found her courage in order to just stop and bear witness to what is, just in case. Now, the gentleman was arrested and they took the car, leaving his pregnant wife on the side of the road. Stellar, being Stellar, got out of her car, went over to the lady, heard about how they're just recovering or trying to recover from the news that their son was just killed. She's pregnant. She's got about $2 in her pocket. And so Katie, Stellar, see, new thoughts, difficult. Stellar took her home, gave her the $20 she had in her pocket, and got her talking about music. Something else. That is compassion. That, as she posted about it on Facebook, is what she is calling all of us into doing. Leading from the heart. Thomas Merton once wrote, "It is our job to love without stopping to inquire as to whether the person is worthy of it." Our job is to love without stopping to say, well, now wait a minute. Why'd he get arrested? What's up with that car that they took it? There may be very good reasons. I'm sure those cops were not just out trying to mess with somebody's day. They're trying to do their job. Katie recognized that her job was to offer the love. And in her Facebook post, she calls to all of us to do the same thing. Because what she said is, it's that kind of connection. It's that kind of being willing to love one another actively, compassionately, that is creating the changes we want. It's already happening. One of the things she wrote is, the future we seek will not originate in an office. It will well up into existence from inside you. And she capitalizes the Y in you, which tells me that what's welling up into an existence from inside you is the you that is divine. It's not about who deserves it. And in my meditation this morning, I actually stopped to have a good giggle because I recognized that the same people I hear saying, well, rationally and logically and blah, 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 these people that are in need of so much stuff, why should I give them my money, blah, 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 and I will catch them. They are so busted over and over and over. They are the first ones to step up and help. So long as they're not thinking about it, they forget and become great big mushes. They are the first people I see very quietly pulling somebody aside to put some cash in their hand. Quietly. Most people won't even notice it happening. They are the first people who tend to be calling and saying, "Are you okay, and what can I do to help?" And then show up with spaghetti pie or dessert or whatever. So logically, we have been trained that we're supposed to question before we give, right? That's the rational, logical things to do. And yet Shakespeare says that the heart has reasons that reason knows not of. The heart has reason that reason knows not of. A lot of the spiritual truths that I teach are completely, redonkulously stupid on a business plan. If I was going to put up a business plan, I probably would not tell the bank that my first step was to get together with people in Vision for 6 months. But you know what? Reverend Dr. Edward Viljoen, who has a huge center, does not so much as start a cupcake cooking group. That'd be a cool group. Does not so much as start a circle without the requirement that those people have been visioning together for 6 months. That is how that works. They actually, oh my God, who'da thunk it, use the tools. Even though it doesn't make sense. On my business plan, I'm probably not going to tell people that I will be in prayer and meditation on that specific issue for a good half an hour a day in the 2 weeks leading up to my asking for the business loan. Believe me, the loan officer does not care, does not understand that that's what's going to make the whole thing work. When they were building Founders Church, that Ernest Holmes actually was there for, he wasn't crazy about the idea of a new sanctuary, but he's like, do what you want to do. If the one mind is calling it forth, then let's just do it. He used to go and sit in and amongst all those construction workers, go sit in the middle of what would become the sanctuary and pray it into being. That, I think, is why even now Founders Church is thriving. Reverend, I believe it's Dr. Arthur Chang is the minister there now. And he is willing to work this philosophy to the point where, yes, he has a congregation that speaks English, but he's surrounded by, I believe it's Vietnamese people. So guess what? They have 2 congregations teaching science of mind in one building because he is willing to be open to the new idea. What are kids doing now? Well, apparently at Founders Church, they're not necessarily speaking English. Okay. Kids today, those multilingual little... These are the new thoughts, the way of doing things differently that are working well in our society today. And because I've been reading The Care of the Soul by Thomas More, I was reminded that when we think of the heart, we can take it into a more mystical, metaphorical understanding and get a lot more out of it than just say, leading from the heart means that I actually use my compassion. The heart is a muscle. It's not just a muscle, but it is a muscle, and therefore it must be exercised. If we will not practice using our hearts, if we will not practice compassion actively, that muscle will eventually atrophy. And I think there are places in our society now that are showing signs of atrophy of the heart. That's where you see the most pain happening. That's where you see the most evidence of a belief in separation. Remember, I said a belief in separation. There's no such thing as separation. It's the boogeyman that lived under your bed at some point in most of our childhoods. Yours might have like upgraded into the closet. I don't know. We use our hearts like a muscle. And man, some people, have you noticed, they're completely ripped. They're like cut. Okay. They're extremely in good shape. Do we understand what that means? Okay. They are doing it. They're making it happen. Their hearts are so big, not in an enlarged sense, which is bad, but they have such big hearts that that's what you can see when they're still a mile off. It's what you can feel anytime you sit down with them. Is that somebody you know? I'm seeing a few nodding heads. If you don't know that person, it's entirely possible that you are that person. And that's why you can't see it around you. That great big heart that you are exercising, that you are choosing to compassionately use. Now, when we refuse to listen to our hearts, then we get the icky feelings of guilt. That's where our conscience, not just consciousness, but conscience lives. I was driving home one day because my contacts were annoying me and I was hungry, and it seemed like a good idea to get away from the public eye for an hour so I didn't have to apologize later. And as I drove home, on the corner, close to almost nothing, was a gentleman who was just sitting there on his walker. Looked perfectly happy. But it struck me as odd that he was sitting there. Logically, I had a schedule. Logically, I had things that I was responsible for that I needed to do. Logically, I had no reason to believe that that man was anything other than exactly where he wanted to be. So yes, I continued home. I dealt with food. I dealt with the cats, thank God. I dealt, because if I don't feed them on their schedule, then bad things happen to the carpets. I had logical reasons, rational reasons to keep going. But do you think I forgot about him for 1 second and wasn't concerned? Do you think there wasn't a part of me going, Kathleen, Ann, you are a minister. How about you act like it? And so when I drove back on my way to work and I saw he was out there, I said, well, son of a motherless goat. And I pulled over, and I got to know Mumford, who was mad because his son wouldn't take him to go shopping. He went to work instead, like that's more important. I got to know this very sweet man who had made it all of several blocks running away. And he seemed pretty with it, but he also did not move from his chair. And that told me, especially since it was flippin' cold out, I mean, it was all the way down to 50, which for here is cold, especially if you're just sitting there. I ended up, I didn't know what else to do. I thought I was probably wasting their time, but I called the cops to do a wellness check, a roving wellness check, I figured. Mumford looks at me and goes, here come the fuzz. Okay. The cop was kind enough to take him to a restaurant. I don't know how Mumford got back. I don't know if they found his son. I'm sure his son was not happy. But this is leadership from the heart. It may not make sense. It will not fit into your schedule. It probably won't be convenient. It probably will not make sense to the people who you're asking for the loan at the bank. But stopping, because that's what Stellar Dutcher asked of me, rather than driving on, gave me a wonderful experience and a peek into someone else's life. And so Mumford was not sitting out there for hours. I don't know how long he'd been there. Scared the bejeebers out of me when he just kind of stood up and walked over to my car, and I'm like, really? I'm trying to be compassionate and save you here. Sit down. It may not fit with what your ego thinks you should be doing. It may make you late to an appointment. It might mean that you have to skip lunch. I promise you, no one in this room is going to starve to death for want of one meal. Especially me. I'll make up for it later. A lot of the tools that we use are heart-centered. And so they don't make sense to people who are not used to relying as much on the brain cells that actually exist in your heart as the ones that exist in your head. When I got into this particular teaching, I was broke. I was so broke. I was what you might call po, because I couldn't afford the OR at the end. I quit drinking and smoking, not because I was virtuous, but because I couldn't afford either one of those. Oh no, I ended up not having pneumonia one year. Yay. That's what happens when you stop smoking, by the way. That's what happened when I stopped smoking anyway. I eventually was introduced to some of these concepts, and on my way to declare bankruptcy, I said, okay, God, if you want this paid off, you'd better do it, because I ain't got the money. That Monday, I canceled the appointment with the lawyer and said, bring it. That Monday, I found out from my boss that my job had created a position so that they could promote me and give me a raise. Bless you. Then I went and got with, because, you treat and then you move your feet. You got to be willing to do your part. And I went to somebody that helped people create a financial plan that gets them out of debt. Jim, that's for you, I think. The first guy I went to knew that I was tithing and told me I had to stop. I told him I had to speak to someone else. I actually walked out completely embarrassed and felt led to try again. The next woman that I spoke to I said, look, my only requirement is please don't ask me to stop tithing. It's a spiritual practice for me. It's really important, and I'm still Catholic enough to think I'm going to hell if I don't do it. I was early in my days of tithing. I didn't get it. This woman pointed to the religious symbol that was hanging from her ear and said, I get it. I understand. Now, I get that tithing doesn't make sense to most people. Neither does having a dedicated time in your day to pray. Neither does necessarily coming here every Sunday morning when you should be at your kid's football game. Or sleeping in. If you were at home drinking your second cup of coffee, that's self-care, right? The tools we use are not necessarily logical, but they work, and they work really well. And because I did the tools when they didn't make any flippin' sense to me at all, I went from that canceling my bankruptcy and being literally within hours of homelessness to where I am today. Making a living wage and doing just fine in a job I adore. Well, 99% of it I adore, but then there's that 1% that makes me go, wow, I remember when this was my full-time job, and I hated it. And now it's only 1%. My worst days are better than my old best days. These tools work. And they will lead you into your heart, which may or may not make sense to the rest of the world. Here's the other thing about living from your heart, or living equally in head and heart. If you think about the muscle that is the heart, if it only takes in and then holds on to the blood, what happens? There's a reason we have a new defibrillator outside. It's because that sometimes happens whether we like it or not. It must be willing to receive and give and receive and give and receive and give and receive and give. This is how it works. You cannot be attached to a lot and think that you're part of that endless cycle of giving and receiving. The trees right now are giving us a beautiful example of letting go with grace. Kids today, millennials, are part of the gig economy. For those of you who don't know, a gig is basically a short-term job. There's a lot of people, including in my generation, because I hear about it, that are doing contract work. They're well paid when they have a job. It does not come with health care benefits. It does not come with any kind of security. What it comes with is a lot of freedom. But you, if you are part of the gig economy, if your primary source of financial income is through doing different gigs, you have a second full-time job, which is called looking for work. There's not much security in that. There's a great deal of freedom. They have released the idea of retirement after 40 years with a strong pension, which doesn't exist anymore, and the gold watch, and they have accepted, I can work from home. I can work on the beach. I can work in the car as my partner is driving it as we go to the next really cool place that we're going to live for a few months. There's a giving and a receiving. The gig economy, and by the way, even if you aren't considered part of the gig economy, like about 20% of people are right now, there's another huge chunk that have what we used to call a second job. Now it's referred to as your side hustle. Kids today. They are also part of the gig economy, forever trying to come up with a hack. Remember, we talked about life hacks before. They'll do what's called a house hack. They have finally saved up enough money for the house, and they'll buy a duplex and let their neighbor pay the mortgage. That means that they might have to live in the icky apartment and clean up the first one. And while they're doing the upgrades themselves, because they can get the directions off YouTube, yes, they do. They also have a roommate. Because there's a huge movement now of people who are no longer willing to work for money. They'll work for the joy of it, they'll work for the experience, but they want to get the money part out of the way first, and they're not willing to wait till they're 60. Kids today. They're 40 years old and retired because they lived on beans and rice for about 5 years or whatever. Because they know that their student loans are going to be with them till they're 65. Because they know that there are many ways in which the old ideas of security are no longer there, even though they tended to be raised to expect them. Most of us were taught that if you go to college or if you go to school and you'll get a good job and you'll be safe. I wish I had noticed earlier on that I probably didn't owe anyone else me getting a degree. I did that for my parents because I knew it's what success meant. Kids today tend to be smarter. They do it a little bit differently so that it works now. Kids today are willing to do the hard work of living without security, instead living in a great deal of freedom. But that means that they have to trust a source that is not their job. Many of us still act as if the paycheck we receive is the source of our income. Or the pension we receive is the source of our income. You know it's not. The divine is your source. It might show up as a pension. It might show up as Social Security. It might show up as a paycheck, but the divine is your source. And that's what these kids today are living from. It doesn't make logical sense. They have to lead and live from the heart. And I think they have a lot to teach us. And so let's use our tools and pray that into being. Now, for those of you who are new, I pray from down here because, as I like to say, it puts us on an equal praying field. We are one. We are equal. You have every ability to pray just like I do and get results just like I do. It happens to be my full-time job. And so I ask you to join me in consciousness now. Remember with me that our source is welling up from inside of us. The divine being that lives within each of our skins is what we sometimes call God. And God is opportunity and friendship and joy. God is absolute, pure and perfect abundance and peace. God is that oneness that looks like connection, belonging at the level of effect, at the level of the physical reality we move around in. God is all there is, and there is no second power. And it is that which gives us life. It is that which gives us peace. It is that which gives us absolute peace of mind and the strength to step out in our freedom rather than clinging to security and old ideas. We've traded in those old ideas. We are no longer eligible to partake of sin and suffering and lack and limitation because we stand in the truth now. The truth of all beings. And it is because we stand in the light of this truth that each and every one of us is a healing presence. Each and every one of us feels compelled to love without condition, without checking first to see who might deserve it. Each and every one of us is the place where God shows up, asking what would love do now, and doing that, whether it makes logical sense or not. That is the divine within each and every one of us moving into action. I celebrate that we are inerrantly led by the divine. That good and more good is part of this world that works for everyone, and it is part of our divine inheritance. Resting in that, grateful that this is simply the truth, and that we are now free to live in it. I let it be. I call it good and very good, and so it is.